All right, so this is where we work, and we are here for the specialization orientation session. I'm going to talk for a little bit about who we are. My name is Heidi Pressline, and I am the Director of Practicum Education at the School of Social Work. And in the space, we have a few other Practicum folks. And so might you introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Madison. I am one of the Practicum coordinators and adjunct faculty at the School of Social Work. Really happy to be here with you all this afternoon.
Hello, I'm Kelly Leaf. I'm one of the Practicum coordinators, and it is nice to see you all and meet some of y'all.
And you met Katie as you came in the door, is my imagination. Katie's still standing guard at the door to let any stragglers in. Katie is also a Practicum coordinator. We have two other members of our team. One is another Practicum coordinator named Ashley Agee, and Ashley works with only students who are Title IV child welfare students. And then we have our program coordinator, Rosetta Cheers, and Rosetta and Ashley are both out ill. And so they did not get to join us today and send their regards. Talking about language and the importance of language, one of the things that we are striving to do is to be aware of the language that we use and finding language that is trauma-informed, least oppressive. And so you will hear people talk about things like pronouns and preferred pronouns. You will hear things. One of the biggest is that we do not use the term field to refer to the work that we do, but rather we use the word practicum. And that changes based on some research that has come out from our colleagues over in the East Coast that have said the term field actually has a lot of oppressiveness, and the language shift is to move it to the word practicum. We adopted that right away, said we can get on board with that. I will refer to things like slave labor, labor that happens in the field that is unpaid. There's a lot of interesting elements to that thought that we said we're on board. We don't have a problem with shifting to practicum. I will say that it is probably a very fast implementation. Most schools of social work are moving to practicum as the term and terminology while still referring to the multiple fields of study. And so we're not saying the word field is bad or wrong. We're just saying that in the practice of what we do, we are choosing to use the word practicum instead of the word field. Our roles, we are all referred to by ourselves as the practicum coordinator. That's the term that we use. You might be an agency coordinator, and you would know that you're the agency coordinator if you have the ability to change your agency's information in our IPT system. Someone at each agency has that ability, and they are the primary person that Rosetta communicates with. They are also the person who will receive information soon this fall about MERC. If you're not familiar with MERC, check with Rosetta and be careful to watch Rosetta's emails to see if you qualify for MERC funding. And I won't say a whole lot more about that, but I will individually if you want to talk about it. Practicum instructors. Practicum instructors are social workers who have a license in the state of Minnesota, 2 years of experience, and hold an MSW. There are licensed social workers that do not hold MSWs, and there are MSWs who do not hold licenses. And so it's really important that a practicum instructor holds all of those things. And so if someone in your organization is working with you as a practicum instructor, students know that that's the main person that's gonna sign off on their paperwork. There are some organizations that we work with and have worked with historically that might have had a practicum instructor in years past, and that person left the organization, and we continue to work with that organization because of the quality of the work that happens there. And we provide an off-site volunteer supervisor to meet that practicum instructor role. When that happens, and when you have a colleague who helps you in the supervision of the student, we refer to that person as the task supervisor. That's someone who simply is, we have no requirements around qualifications, but they're a person who the practicum instructor or the agency person has identified as being someone who is going to oversee day-to-day tasks of the student, additional supervision to the student, and they may be the person who's in charge of the team, but maybe they have a degree in psychology or a different field than social work and they don't qualify as the practicum instructor. We call them the task supervisor. You can not have a task supervisor, only have a practicum instructor, and that is okay. All right. And finally, we have the student, and the student being maybe the reason that we are all doing this. I'm going to ask for you to introduce yourself. And if you would, which of these roles do you hold in your organization? And do you know who you're going to supervise? Might you start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jenna Noland. I am a practicum instructor at the Center for Victims of Torture, and I will be working with Matt Dooley.
My name is Connor Malloy at the Center for Victims of Torture, and the same thing with task supervising.
And my name is Ines Barosca, and I'm practical instructor, and I will have two students from Cuba.
Brittany Lochner, I am a practicum instructor, I think, and we will have 3
Awesome. And where is your organization?
DCYF.
Awesome. Do you want to go back there?
My name is Shereen Retta, she, her pronouns. I'm with Minnesota Social Service Association. I'm going to be a practicum instructor. And we will be working with, and do not recall this last name at the moment.
And I'm Beth Ringer. I'm also with the Minnesota Social Service Association, and I'm the agency coordinator and a practicum instructor. And between me and Shereen, we'll have 2 students this school year.
I'm Erin Sutton. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota, and I am a practicum instructor, and we are hosting David. Neil, I am at Gillette Children's, and I'm so happy to be sharing Carmen Lynch, fabulous student, with my colleague. And I think because I signed up first, I'm the agency coordinator, so the emails come to me. But I'm also for the hat of practicum supervisor. And Michelle Levick from Gillette Children's, and I'm hosting her.
I'm Virginia Suarez, she, her. I'm a practicum instructor with Campus Health. I'll be hosting 1 student either do.
I'm Randy Conway. I will be a practicum instructor with the Minneapolis VA. I'll be hosting Elizabeth P.
Stacy Miss Yemen, I'm the instructor in VA Medical Center Mental Health Clinic, and I will be hosting Elizabeth B.
My name is Sarah Green. I am agency coordinator and instructor. I'm from North Carolina Hospice and local
hospice, and I'll be the task supervisor.
Molly Fillet. I work at International Special Academy, and I'm the agency coordinator and the practicum instructor for soccer.
I'm Mary Coyle. I'm also with the Minneapolis VA Hospital Subacute Rehab, practicum instructor, and I will have my Nebraska. Soon to be stopped.
Sarah, I am a practicum instructor at Lawrence Clinic and will have
I'm Andreas, he, him pronouns. I am a social worker at Fairview Riverside in the ED and ICU. I'm a practicum instructor and I'll be hosting Sam, who I believe is coming from Augsburg.
All right. Awesome. Well, we are glad that you are here. And,
Sorry, I don't think Katie got it.
oh,
Oh,
would you like to introduce yourself?
oh, I am, I think you.
Oh, okay.
I am, yes, thank you.
For you.
Yeah, Heidi probably mentioned me earlier, but I'm Katie Cobb. I'm one of the practicum coordinators.
Awesome. In the folder that you have, there are lots of resources. And on top of the folder, you will find two things. The first is you will find a survey regarding the day and the training that we're going to do. And the second thing you will find is a random blank or thinking of you card. And I want to explain the card situation briefly, quickly. So one of the ways that we are intending to support our students this year is to have a clothesline of positive messages. And so these cards are ways that we are going to ask you to write a positive message to a student who might need a little lift, a little something of encouragement from a random person. You can sign it or not sign it. But if you will write a message of support, encouragement, you're excited that they've chosen to become a helper in whatever way you want to say it, we would love it. These cards, we did not spend any money on any cards, but rather my parents owned a flower and gift shop. And when they closed their flower and gift shop, all of the Hallmark cards and note cards and whatnot went in a dresser. And I've been cleaning out their homes. And so I thought, what a great way to get rid of all these cards is to give them to the students. So thank you for helping me get rid of these cards. And the idea is we're going to hang a bunch of them and always have them available to the students, and we'll see what happens with that. But let's try. At the end of the day, you can throw both your surveys and the cards in this box, and we'll take it from there. As I said, in the folder, you will find the front page on the right will say creating a vision on it. Now that might be on the back side or the front side of that first page on the right-hand side. And the creating a vision is we would like you to take a couple minutes and think about making a list of imagining termination. We talk often with our students about when does termination begin? It begins at the beginning, right? At the start. And so we want to practice with you imagining what skills and abilities will your student have? What do you envision them to be able to do at the end of your internship? And take a couple notes on that. Anybody need a pen? I promise you will have more time to play with this. I'm gonna talk real briefly about our students. You'll see on this slide that there is 80-10, SW 80-10, 80-20, and 80-30. And we refer to our students often in the course registration based on those numbers. 10 students are our foundation students. They are in their first year typically of the program, and they are engaging in a foundation placement that is an introduction to what is social work. They are students who have a bachelor's degree in something other than social work and have chosen to come into social work. Sometimes we see that that's a complementary degree like psychology, family social science. Other times it looks a lot like biology, criminal justice, fashion design. It could be anything. And they've decided that this is the path that they want to go to. So in that foundation curriculum, they participate in a generalist 19 credits of very intensive basics of social work. The 80-20 students are in their second year. These are students who are returning from their foundation placement. They are intensively engaged in very specific curriculum regarding their specialization area. Currently, we have 4 specialization areas, and the students who engage, let's go back to the foundation, you will see them somewhere between 12 and 16 hours a week at an internship, whereas specialization students are at their internship about 18 to 20 hours a week. And so they're working to get to a minimum of 600 hours. And so they're much more intensively engaged. 80-30 students, the difference of their specialization is that 80-30 students come in already with a bachelor's degree in social work, and they only have to slide into that specialization curriculum. And so they do a total of 34 credit hours. They only do 1 internship with our program. And that would be that minimum of 600 hours that they do with you. Do you know if your student is advanced standing or second year? Okay. So our curriculum is focused on the Council for Social Work Education's 9 competencies, and we're going to talk about those, and you actually have a handout about them, so you can look at it if you'd like, but I just want you to know that it's in your packet. It starts with the core values of social work, then it talks about knowledge and skills, and then at the bottom of the form, it's got the 9 competencies. These 9 competencies apply to every setting that our students are in, and they apply to most all courses cover different content areas of these 9 competencies. Some courses cover them all a little bit. Some courses are designated specifically to a specific 1 or 2. Our hope is that we are teaching them social work, not value, knowledge, and skills, and that we're really working on skill development in practicum. We're also responsible to prepare students for ethical practice. Really important in their practicum experience. So important in their practicum experience that we have preset their first learning contract goal to be about ethical practice so that they talk about it and engage in it with you. And finally, we are to teach, monitor, and mentor something that's called cognitive and affective processing. That's the Council for Social Work Education's expectation. If we take that apart, cognitive is your head, right? What are you thinking? And affective is what are you feeling about what you're doing being a social worker. engaging with these clients, engaging with these systems, engaging with biases, with prejudices, with new learning, with old stories, whatever it is, but how do we talk about it to be able to continue to come back to ethical practice? I'm going to tell you a little bit of updates about what's happening in our school and at our program. One of the first things is we are actively engaged in updating our curriculum with the new curriculum rollout up for 25-26. If you've been around for a while, you'll know that right now we teach 4 specialization areas: clinical mental health, families and children, health, disability and aging, and community practice. Before that, we had a direct practice and a community practice or macro practice program. So we had 2 tracks. We're actually going back to 2 tracks. Rationale and reason for that is that, one, it's going to give us more opportunity to offer choice in the curriculum to the students. The other big reason is that we had really high hopes that health, disability, and aging would be a move that students would want to pay more attention to than they're committed to. And not that we're getting rid of health, disability, and aging in the redesign, but we're creating it as an open opportunity for all students to have more choice in how they design their program. Right now, what we see is that health, disability, and aging classes have less than 5 students in them most of the time, while the clinical mental health courses have about 70 students. And you can imagine what the instructor's equity prep is for those things. There's a lot of conflict about, we need to have more equity in the sizes of our classes. And when we only have 2 students a semester who wants to be in a health, disability, or aging course, maybe we wait until next semester when we might get 4. But because it's a requirement of the curriculum, we have to run it. And so we're hoping to be more economical in what the options are and how we make that available to the students, but we're trying to be a little smarter about it. Another really big thing is that we are implementing, we have funding to start an LADC program as an in-house joint program. The Center for Practice Transformation is really helpful in getting us this program set up. And so our students beginning in January are going to be able to start taking the LADC coursework, and then to be able to add practicum to that next year. And so what you'll see is that if you work in the realm of chemical dependency, you're going to see that students need to have 900. The law says 880. Our school is saying 900 hours as a minimum for practicum for a student who is doing an MSW LADC. So we'll be implementing that for next year. But it's exciting. It's really cool to think that our students could have and the preparation to have an LADC at the time that they graduate and work in the realm of prepping for independent licensure as an LADC. It's kind of cool. Another big thing is that the Department of Education has awarded us a school pipeline grant for this school year. What that looks like is that our school is able to fund up to 20 students who are going into school social work or school-based mental health as a social worker. And the money in that grant is kind of really exciting. The students are going to get a $13,000 grant of a stipend for their practicum. So in essence, they have a paid practicum. They also are getting $22,000 towards their tuition. So $11,000 a semester. It will pay for their school year, which is really exciting. And the Department of Education there's a few other kind of benefits. It's gonna pay for their school social work license. Will pay for them to go to the school social work conference. It will give them a year's membership as a school social worker in the Minnesota School Social Work Association. What's very exciting about this is that different from other, for example, our Title IV-E Child Welfare Grant, they get funded per semester, and for each semester that they're funded, they have to work in child welfare or pay it back. This grant, the Department of Education says, we want to track them for 2 years, but we have enough belief that they're going to love school social work so much that if they don't do school social work, they don't have to pay us back. But we believe that if they get into the school, they're going to love it and they're going to stay there. And so it's very interesting to think about how students are applying or not applying for this money. The last is that we have some funding to provide licensure preparation within our school. This funding came from the Department of Human Services, and it was our request to look at some sort of a reparation and assistance after. So I know I throw a lot of acronyms out, but the Association of Social Work Boards, which is ASWB, released information in 2022 regarding statistics of who's passing the exam. The social work licensure exams at all levels, at all states, at all schools, all of it is available. Our pass rate is somewhere in the range above 95%. From our school, we're the top school in the state of Minnesota for licensure passing on the first attempt. That doesn't change the fact that it's still biased. And the students who aren't passing. And statistically across our nation, we see that white students are passing the test much greater rates than students of color. Black students, for example, are passing at less than 50% on their first attempt. It's pretty biased. The scary thing about Black students is that more than 50% of the students who fail on their first attempt do not take the test again. They leave the profession or they engage in the profession unlicensed. That's a real big problem, right? And so even though we're at 95% pass rate, we still have room to improve. And some of the ways that we can help our students is to help them do student prep. If you have an advanced standing student, they could be up to 7 years since they were in school to get their bachelor's degree. And when you start talking about Freud and Erik Erikson in developmental stages, that is not something at the front of their brain. That is something that they have forgotten about, and it is 27% of the exam, right? It's a huge thing for our advanced standing students to have to relearn things that are that important. And a lot of our students, that first semester that they're in this foundation curriculum, they are so overwhelmed, the amount of what they take in and retain is low. And so by having a licensure prep class, we feel that we might approach that 5% that's not passing and give them an edge to pass. We believe so much in this that what we've put into the grant is that if a student participates in the licensure prep course and fails the exam, are willing to tell us they failed the exam, we will pay for them to retake the test. That's what we wrote into our grant. We don't want any barriers for our students not to take that exam again. We'll see where this goes. We're doing license prep in October, and I think it goes slightly into November. We're doing 2 sessions, a total of 16 hours of prep, Tuesdays and Saturdays this fall, and then in February next spring.
Funding, can they retake the prep test as well?
They could retake the prep test if they needed to. Yeah, I don't think that we would limit them from that. Yeah. We encourage our students who intend to graduate in May that in October, they start the process of applying for licensure. It typically takes about 45 days for them to get approval to take the test. And if they plan it well, they can plan to take the licensure exam as an LGSW to become an LGSW during winter break. That's what we hope for them. So those students that are graduating in May, we want them to do the licensure prep course in October. And then if they don't pass during winter break, they have to wait 90 days unless they missed by one. They have to wait for 90 days before they can retake the test. And that's going to put them at about spring break time. So they could still retake the test before they expect to graduate. So we've got it planned out for them. We hope they'll follow the plan. All right, let's go back to your papers for 1 second. On the other side of your visioning, we have a task that is about making that vision a reality. What do you need to do in order to help your student to be able to buy into and partake in your vision? What do you think your roles are there? And I'll give you a couple minutes to look at that. Again, you're going to get an opportunity to use this paper and the information there in another section of what we're doing. So I'm going to move us along. And this time, what I would like you to do in your packet, you will find something that looks like this, and it is the Kolb Learning Style Inventory. If you are a former student, you might recognize this. As an experienced practicum instructor, you might recognize this. And we're going to walk through this, or at least the first few pages of it. So this is a tool that there is a lot of research about this. And we're going to talk about the whys of this in just a minute, but I'm going to tell you the how of this. On page 2, you will see that there are 12 questions with an example above it. And the example says, when I learn, and there are 4 options, I am happy, I am fast, I am logical, and I am careful. And the idea here is that you would identify the choice that is most like you and give it a value of a 4. That is the highest number. And then you would find which one is your next choice and give it a 3. Your third choice would get a 2, and your last choice would get a 1. And if you will answer those 12 questions, that would be phenomenal. And at the bottom, you will see some letters CE and equals ROAC and AE. And all that is we would like you to create a sum of the column above it. when you have your 4 numbers at the bottom of the chart, you can turn to the page that has a target looking on it, the next page, and you will see that at the top, there is a concrete experience, the CE. And there you want to take the number that you had in the first column and plot it from the center up. Find where the number that correlates with yours and put a dot or a line or something. You will have 4 to plot that go clockwise. And at some point, you'll have a dot and a dot and a dot and a dot. And if you connect them, it makes some sort of 4-sided square or diamond or something that looks a little bit like a triangle. And once you have that done, if you turn to the next page, you're gonna see at the bottom of this 4 squared grid, something that looks a little bit like an algebraic, but it really are those 4 totals. AC minus CE and AE minus RO, and you might end up with 1 or 2 negative numbers. Social workers do math. The gift of our phones, they have calculators. And if you found those 2 numbers at the bottom, you can carefully look at the grid. And now you're going to watch for the negative side of the grid so that you are charting according to what your outcomes were. And so you'll have 1 number on each axis. And if you connect them, whichever way you connect them. Correct. And if you want help, if I've lost you, we have lots of helpers in the room.
Yeah.
I did that. I'm very.
So.
Okay.
Got it?
I can see that.
I got it, but I don't agree with what it says that it apparently means, but.
Oh, and yours said.
Well, cause some of these I'm like, isn't it the same thing, or yes, and like it's both? 2 things can be true at once.
Absolutely.
So like your mind.
Yeah, but that's been debunked, like, quite strongly. I was watching a SSW training and the guy very, it was like, my very personal bunk, it should not be getting as much like practice as it does, because within it have no like training and evidence-based practice, like do not, like it's pop psychology. And it was like, oh, that's a very strong opinion.
kind of look at it like a strong. Yeah, I would. That's the deal. He was like screens by other meetings. Like going all university also.
I mean.
All right, I am going to share some information now about this learning style inventory. And I'm going to ask you to find the page that has the target. Yep, it says the cycle of learning. And as you think about this, there are 4 areas where we want you to remember and think about that cognitive and affective thinking, or cognitive and affective processing. And at the top, you have a number that is about feeling, and at the bottom, you have a number that is about thinking. And I wonder how pronounced those are for you. Right? Some people have very long thinking and feeling. And I have a bias that the longer you are in practice, the more that those awarenesses become, that the higher that they are. However, there are some practitioners who are absolutely split evenly, and it looks like a square. And according to Kolb, that's really about balance. It's an interesting thing. This is a tool, and only a tool, that helps you to think about how you're going to learn. Maybe your learning and your teaching are the same, and maybe not. I am a doer. I am much more of a doer than I am maybe a thinker, or maybe an observer, or maybe a feeler. I am very much a doer. And in my doing, if a supervisor, someone said to me, here, read this manual, I'm probably going to take a nap because I don't learn really well that way. And so if I have to read it, I will, but I'll go at it pretty slow. I'm a slow reader. But if I know that it's available to me as a resource, I'm going to use it much better. I'm going to learn by doing. I'm okay to make mistakes. I'm okay to have to learn from the way that I've done it. That doesn't scare me. For some people, doing something, not knowing that they'll do it well, is terrifying. Some people want to observe until they are sure that they know every possible outcome before they begin to engage. So we have students who are going to be observers that come January, they're still trying to observe, and you have to push them a little bit to do more, right? Because they're still worried. about that perfect way to do it. And there are some doers that come January, you're gonna need to slow them down so that they begin to process why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what is happening in the doing of what they're doing. Okay, so you've got the doers on one side and the watchers on the other. And you've got the thinkers and the feelers. If you look at the very front chart of this, it looks something like this. On the front chart, you're going to likely have some sort of symbol. Mine looks a little bit like initiating. Here's that balance, that perfect balance that seems to be an ideal. But it's our starting place. And your student has a starting place. And it is the place when they get stressed that they're going to go to. It's kind of like how we process when we're set off. When we're under stress, when we're in a crisis situation, when we're trying something new, when we're trying to begin. And so as you work with your student, it's important to know how they learn. As the teacher, as the mentor, it's important to think, what do they need from me as their first learning style? But it's also important to know how you learn, how you teach. And it's important to share that conversation with the student. We give this tool to the students at orientation. That's next week. They will do it with us, and they will get a second copy where we will ask them to bring it to you to do it with them. Now you already did it. So you can say to them, oh, I've done that already. And the outcome on this grid here, I am an accommodator. That's all you need to tell them. Is I did mine and I came out as an accommodator, a diverger, an assimilator, a converger, because they're going to have a task where they need to bring that information back to seminar. Okay? But it's really important when they ask you to do it that you ask them, where did they fall in this world? And what did their results look like? So that you know that. You know how they learn best, how they prefer to learn. Okay? Questions about that? I have one more handout that I want you to look at with me regarding the learning style inventory. In your folder, there is a handout that has 4 circles on it. Not to be confused with the SMART handout, but there is one that has simply 4 circles. I believe it is on the other side of the Johari window. Perfect. So what's unique about this handout is that it is very similar. It has the same titles as that target page. And so when you think about where a student is going to come to you in conversation to tell you about something, they're likely to come to their starting place. And that's the detail of a story that they're going to tell you. And what's really powerful is to help them work around to the other 4 areas. So they are thinking more broadly, more balanced than where they start. And so an example, if you have a student who is in abstract contemplation, right? They might come to you to tell you what went well. And that's wonderful to hear what went well. What's the rest of the story? right? Or a student who comes to you and all they're focused on is what went wrong. How do we help them to look at the rest of the story? What happened before all of this started? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What did this trigger for you? This is a wonderful supervisory tool to help you to think about asking other questions when they're telling you about their work. Okay? Any questions about the learning style inventory? There's lots of wonderful other reading about it and kind of what you're good at and what you might do first. I will say that usually I ask, and so I will ask, how many divergers are in the room? Couple? And assimilators? And converters? Couple and accommodators. Awesome. The reality of this is that if we did a group project, you would want someone from all 4 of these stages in your group. At least one. And my joke is often about the divergers, and I don't mean to pick on the divergers, but the divergers are really good at coming up with ideas.
Yes.
Really good. And we do need them. We absolutely need them. But they're a pain in the ass come the end of the project.
Oh my God.
Do you know why? Because they're still coming up with ideas. They're still trying to improve and figure out what else could we do. And for those of us that are like, we gotta get this done, they got more ideas. And it's a little bit funny to think about. But the idea is that we all have unique roles, right? And we find balance somewhere in the midst of each other. So it's a really helpful tool. It helps students to understand. Students react in a couple different pretty common ways with this. Some of them will say that this is like reading your horoscope, right? They don't give it the credit that the research actually is attached to this. Another thing that they do is that they say, well, I bet it changes. I've been taking this exam, this little questionnaire, since 2008, and I can't get out of the accommodator role. Right? I'm stuck there. That is just naturally where I'm at. It's also really interesting to think about the students who say, I am just like you. We're both accommodators. This is going to be fun. You think like me. Right? And that's fun until you have a disagreement about the way something goes. And then they think, oh goodness, we actually don't think like one another. And it becomes something. The other is that if you were at the opposite, diagonally different from your student, it can also be a little bit of a worry for some students. It can be a source of conflict. You see things really different than I do. You approach things really different than I do. Reframe that. Help the student to see that we approach things differently. We are going to learn from each other. We are going to balance each other. We're going to bring things to the table that we might not if we thought the same way. All really important. It's important to talk with your student about the outcome of this. All right. Sweet. Okay, I'm going to talk for just a little bit more, and then we're going to get some of my colleagues to talk. Our practicum training is some of what we need to talk about today are the Council for Social Work Education Accreditation. They set up a framework on how we are supposed to prepare our MSW students. Some things are very specific in what they tell us we need to provide the students, and some things are much more broad or loose, and we get to give it personality. Think about how do we want to, at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota, deliver this information. One of the things that has happened in this last year is that our general counsel, our legal team at the School of Social Work, has said that we need to tighten up the idea of financial support to our students. And really, it's not our financial support, it's your financial support of students. And so what they have said is that it's okay for you to give a student a stipend or not. It is also okay for you to pay a student or not. But it is not okay with our school for you to pay a student based on their production of labor. And this is a really big thing. If you work in the realm of CPT codes, you might be inclined to say that based on how many billable hours a student produces, you will pay them a dollar amount. And it's an amazingly lucrative thing for agencies and students. And it's exploitative. And so what we have had happen is that students are encouraged to increase their billable hours. They make more money. So does the agency. However, the quality of their work is not the priority. And as a result of that, students are producing crappy work. And students are producing really bad habits of kind of this materialistic financial gain practice rather than learning how to do really good quality work and take care of themselves as they learn how to do that. And so our general counsel has put into effect that we cannot have a student in a placement that is production-based or labor-based. The end of last week, we lost an agency. The agency couldn't make the adjustment to either pay an hourly rate or to give a stipend or nothing at all. And their corporate said, we can't take your interns. So we have 2 interns that we're trying to find new homes for. And we'll find them. We've got some great offers, but it's an unexpected adjustment. And we hope that it's for the better for the student. We'll see. They set what's called EPAS. These are the specifics of what we need to teach and include in our training. You'll see this language in a lot of communication from us and on the learning contract. And the most important thing in all of this is that we are a competency-based program. And what is different is that historically we were a standards-based program. The competency-based is about the outcome. The standards-based was about what we taught. And so if you can imagine the subtle shift, it was where in the curriculum are you teaching these things? And as long as we were teaching them, we were meeting the expectation. But what's really important is what comes out of that education, and student competence is what we're looking for. And so this new competency-based is really important. What's fun about that is that you have a really important role. You get to decide if the student is demonstrating competence in practicum. Now that can be both a wonderful thing and a challenging thing. It's really important that we have good communication with you. It's really good for us to support you as much as possible and for you to know that we are here to do that. My worst case scenario is that you feel the pressure at the end of the internship to say that somebody is ready and competent to move on and you're not feeling it. Right? You have to attest that the student is ready to graduate and begin practice with an MSW. That's on you. And they either need to be up to that standard or they're not. Kelly had an experience the end of last week that she has a student who thinks she's graduating at the end of this month. And end of last week, maybe it was yesterday, the practicum instructor said, this student's not demonstrating competency. And we have to pivot. Because that student's internship, we talk about minimum number of hours. We say a minimum of 420, we say a minimum of 600. And that's because they not only have to meet the minimum number of hours, they have to demonstrate competence. It doesn't matter how many hours they put in. If they're not competent, they're not done. And some students aren't, they could be there for 1,000 hours and they're not going to demonstrate competence. And we don't want to put that pressure on you. We want you to communicate with us about how they're doing. So if you have red, yellow flags going off, we need to know about those. And the earlier we know about those, the better it is for all of us. We don't want you to have the pressure of being at the last minute and you saying, I can't sleep at night because I don't want to assign this paperwork. Right? Don't hold that burden to yourself. We'll talk about the actual competencies in just a little bit. Kelly, I think you're up.
You are. Thank you. So I saw several of you raise your hand when you were asked if you had an advanced standing student. I just want to point something out about that. We don't necessarily know where all of our BSW students did their BSW. There are several programs in Minnesota. There are programs all over the country. One of the things I noticed last year when I taught an advanced standing seminar is that they all came into their master's program with really different perspectives. And their internships might have been managed differently. So according to our standards, they meet the qualifications to be advanced standing students. And in most respects, they're going to be great. But if you notice some discrepancies between what you think they should know as a master's level student, feel free to check into, dig into a little bit what they did in their BSW, where they did their internships and things like that, just because they're all coming from different places. Your full program second year students did their first year with us. I don't know that we have any transfer students this year. So our specialization curriculum is kind of based right now on those 4 specializations. We have, just to review, we've got the health, disability, and aging. We've got children and families, which is primarily our 4E child welfare students. We have clinical mental health, and then we have macro practice. So we have those 4 tracks. And so for each of those tracks of students, they will be doing an anchor and a boost course. And you can think of that as advanced theory and skills. They will be doing a specialization course, and those are more intense skills in their different tracks. They will be doing practicum and seminars. So that'll be either an 80-20 for your second year students or an 80-30 for your advanced standing students. They will also be doing concurrently an evaluation course for our HDA families and children and clinical mental health students. That's going to be a practice evaluation course. For our macro students, that is going to be a program evaluation course. This is actually a pretty intensive course for them. It is a 2-semester course. It starts in the fall, ends in the spring. And they will be working on an evaluation proposal that will hopefully take place in their practicum. So especially starting second semester, spring semester, you should be having some conversations with your student about the nature of their evaluation study and what that's going to look like and how that might play out in your placement. Confidentiality, aggregation of data, all those kind of things. We also require all of our students to take social work, difference, diversity, and privilege. We feel so strongly about that as a school that it's mandatory for everybody. Students that are in specialization classes or in practicum should have taken that already, or they are taking it at the same time that they're doing their practicum. They will have to take an advanced policy course, and those are also specific. So students that are HDA would be taking a disability policy course. Students that are clinical would be taking a clinical mental health focused policy course. And then they have to take a second anchor for another specialization. And our students really love that. They love having the ability to kind of dip a toe in the other water. So we may have macro practice students that are taking a clinical anchor, or we might have a clinical taking a macro anchor. And so that is kind of their ability to see what the more in-depth theory is for other practice areas. The final thing is that they have 5 credits of free electives that they get to take. Those could be an elective in the School of Social Work. Sometimes students will take another policy course for a different area as one of their electives, or there are a lot of popular courses in the Center for Wellness Studies at the University of Minnesota. Students really like those, or they might take a policy class at the Humphrey Institute. So 5 credits of free electives. Doesn't seem like enough, but most of our students want to get out right away. I'm gonna move this really quick. It won't let me move it. It won't let me move it. Just a quick word about our macro. I know where my team macro is right over there in that part of the room. Does anybody else here have macro practice students? No? Okay. So I'll be speaking directly to you guys. One of the things that's become clear over the last couple of years is that our macro students are a small but mighty portion of our NSW program. And they have decided that class after class after class, they are given the additional labor of having to take our classroom examples and translate them into macro practice social work. And how that looks is if, for instance, I am talking about, say you're a student and you're going to do an intake with a client, and what that intake looks like in an agency, the macro practice student has to stop and think about what an intake means if you're in a macro setting and how you would do that work or what those terms are. And so we're trying to be a little bit more inclusive for our macro students and trying to think a little bit more inclusively ourselves. They're great. They are very, very involved in school. Last year, our macro students actually planned a work talk because they didn't feel like their career exploration was really being talked about in the School of Social Work. We have a job fair. We'll talk about that later. And our macro students were like, bummer, because there really weren't a lot of people there, agencies there that were looking for macro students. So they organized their own job talk. A bunch of them helped to plan our school's participation in Social Work Day at the Capitol. So they're a pretty mighty group. If you have any questions about macro practice social work, by the way, Katie and I are both macro practice social workers, and we would love to talk to you for hours about it, and hours and hours and hours. Wow. There we go.
All right, so I get to talk a little bit about direct practice, the curriculum overview of that. And we have these initials. CMH is clinical mental health, health, disability and aging, family and children, and IPE. This is the interprofessional education program. This is something that I'll talk about in just a minute. But let's start by talking about these three direct practice classes and specializations. Your student has chosen one of them to be their primary, as Kelly said, their specialization, not community practice. In that, they're going to take a single class that is all about the theory behind these three areas. So I will refer to clinical mental health in my example, very clearly demonstrating where Kelly says, let's not do that. Clinical mental health, their anchor class is about learning to use the DSM. Learning how to do a diagnostic assessment that meets the state's requirements. Pretty simple. Not so simple, but that's what it is. Then they take what we refer to as a boost class. It's a skills class, and it's really about what is the finesse? What is the skill that you need to do those diagnostic assessments? In clinical mental health, that's core concepts. What does that mean? It's about building the therapeutic relationship with the client. It's about being with the client and talking with the client and being able to engage them in a way that isn't, okay, the next question on my chart that I need to ask you is, tell me about your family, right? Because in the therapeutic relationship, as you begin to build and engage and assess the student or the client, you listen for the answers to the questions and you decide what do you need to ask next to get more information in order to go deeper, in order to tease out and differentiate the diagnosis, all of the things. And so core concepts is about that therapeutic relationship and building that, engaging the client in that process. What I like to say the difference is that the first class teaches A to Z. This class teaches relationally that it's okay to move around, right? Then students have, in all specializations, including community practice, they have 3 electives that are specific to their specialization, although clinical mental health has 4. The 4 in clinical mental health are to do advanced clinical practice with children and adolescents, advanced clinical practice with families, advanced clinical practice with adults, or serious mental illness. Now you might notice that I said serious mental illness and not serious and persistent mental illness. In the academic world, the P has disappeared. In the academic world, the P has disappeared. In our state, the P hasn't disappeared yet. The P is offensive. It's oppressive. It's a continuous and constant P. And the community has said, let's get rid of the P. So we talk about SMI. SMI is also really cool because it's inclusive of children, adolescents, and adults. And so we're no longer having to remember that SMI is adults and SED is kids. We're just talking about SMI as it applies to different age groups. New, interesting language. So students have to choose 2 of those. They can use their electives to choose more of them if they so want, but they have to choose 2 of those as their specialization. That's kind of the routine for each of these, is that they have an anchor class, a boost class, and then 2 specialization courses. This interprofessional education, in your packet, you have a page that says Center for Interprofessional Health. It has a maroon header on it. And on the right side, it's broken into 2 columns. And on the right side, you will see that it says phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. If you have an advanced standing student, they will do all 3 phases during this internship. If you have a first year student, they're only gonna do phase one, and if you have a second year student, they did phase one last year. Phase one is a real simple introduction to the benefits of working across disciplines, interprofessionally. And it's a pretty interesting thing. At the University of Minnesota, the Center for Interprofessional Health has 22 different disciplines that have signed on to talk about working across disciplines. And so our students have the opportunity to work with nurses and doctors and pharmacists and physical therapists and physician's assistants and they then in phase two participate in a simulation with 4 other disciplines, everybody responding to the same scenario, but with different perspectives. And finally, stage 3 is an activity that they engage in which they educate the others about their discipline. And it's a really cool but new thing. And this year we're more excited about it than last year because we have done more to influence what is being taught so the social workers really feel like they're a part of it. Whether they are macro practice social workers or direct practice social workers. What we need from you in this process is to be talking about what is it to work across disciplines in your settings? What does it look like to be in a clinical setting where there's a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a marriage and family therapist and a social worker, and that we have different core values, we have different code of ethics, we come at things differently, maybe more holistically, but there's value in us being at the table together. In settings where you're in a school, for example, any host setting, whether it's the hospital or the school or the prison, thinking about how do we work across disciplines and know our role and know the priority of what needs to happen for the clients. That's interprofessional education. And so we are hopeful that students begin to see more value in the reality of working across disciplines, but also that they're willing to look at how they're doing that in their internships. I'm going to do one more thing and then we're going to take a break. Okay. I want to talk quickly about those 9 competencies. And the reason for that is remember that you are going to be the person who says, did my student demonstrate that they were competent in these 9 areas? All right, so we want to make sure that we have shared understanding of what these 9 areas are. The first is, are they demonstrating ethical and professional practice? In your packet, we have given you a printout of the code of ethics. As I said, the ethical goal that is on their learning contract is preset for them. How they're going to do it is up to them, but there is a goal that is pre-written that talks about that they are going to address ethics in their practice. The hope is to help them to not get into conflict with the Board of Social Work around ethical behavior, right? But professional behavior, you might need to mentor and guide and shape professional behavior. If a student shows up at the hospital and they're in blue jeans with ripped knees, what's going to happen?
Contact, you're gonna get nasty stuff on your skin.
You might get nasty stuff on your skin, What else is gonna happen? Stacy, how are you gonna handle that? You probably would have said something earlier. Hopefully that didn't happen. Last year it happened at Park Nicollet. We had a student who showed up in a t-shirt and ripped blue jeans. And they got some feedback that this wasn't appropriate clothing to wear. Right? The next day, I think they wore jeans and a t-shirt again, but they didn't have holes in their jeans that day. They got more feedback, and really the conversation became, do they have alternative clothing? Right? Because there might be something more. In this case, I think there was a little bit something else going on as well. But the point being that professional behavior is something that you might need to teach. You might need to shape. If you're going to a conference with a student or a training in the public with the student, and you're embarrassed by their behavior, we hope that you'll say something. Right? You want them to represent you well. We want them to represent our school well. Most are not going to have a problem. Most are going to just be stars. Right? But on occasion, we have to really help shape professional behavior. Things in the code of ethics around dating a client might not seem like a big deal, but it's not uncommon at a school where you're working with a child and they have a parent who's flirtatious and might ask you on a date as a student. And what are the boundaries around that? How does a student learn to know that that's not okay? You can't date your student's parent, right? Our code of ethics includes that. What about social media? Are we allowed to look up our clients on social media? Our code says no. Can they look up you? Can you look up them? That's not in the code. And believe me, they are searching you out. And you're probably needing to search them out as well. And a way that you might search them out is that you might talk about what is our social media presence. And is it appropriate, because you know your clients are going to look you up, is it appropriate that your client who's in the 8th grade can see that over the weekend you were at a party and you've got pictures posted of you drinking? Is that okay at your organization? Is that the professional image that you want out there? How and what are you going to do with that? We're asking you to have those conversations about professionalism, right? Really important. To engage in diversity and difference in practice, I say to students, unless you are looking in the mirror all day, you're going to engage in diversity and difference in practice, right? We do not have the same story. The competencies that we are using at the School of Social Work fall under what was called the 2015 competencies. We have 8 years to implement and or change to the 2022 competencies. We will implement for them next year. This competency probably took the biggest hit. It is the competency that is changed the most. It is very inclusive and wonderfully rewritten from what it is today. I encourage you to look it up and to spend time digesting it with the student because it's lovely. And it really talks about anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices. And there's some wonderful material to implement. We're going to be talking with our students about the reframe of this over the year and probably talking with you about it as well. The third competency is a huge mouthful of advancing human rights. That's the first part. How do we do that? How do we do that in practice? A lot of advocacy, a lot of inclusiveness, a lot of tearing down barriers. We expect our students to be engaged in those practices. And then there's this and social, economic, and environmental justice. That's a mouthful for one competency. Environmental justice was added to it. It used to say social and economic justice, and environmental justice came into it. The students coming through our program are really tuned in to environmental justice. They are curious how we are going to take care of it, the environment, in a way that I wasn't aware of when I was their age. I wasn't thinking about that. They're thinking about it, and they're curious as to how is that impacting your clientele and the work that you do. And it's more than just having a recycling program, right? What does that look like? How do we look at social and economic justice within the organization? What are the barriers to that? The fourth and the fifth competencies are the most academic competencies, but they're real easy to use. The language is terrible, but they're easy. So let me talk about the first one. And I like to start with research-informed practice before practice-informed research. Because I think that research-informed practice is about what happens in the classroom. It's what happens in the textbook. It is that students are research-informed. In other words, if you imagined a student with a backpack, they come to graduate school and we're going to fill it with all the research, the knowledge, the skills, the tools, the ethics that we can think of. And then we're going to say, okay, we think you're ready to go to the internship and use what's in your backpack. So they have been research informed, and now they're going to practice and they're trying to use it. Great example. We teach them how to do something. They go to practice it, and the client says, I don't like the sticker chart idea. Right? We're not doing that. We've tried that. It doesn't work. What else you got? And the student freezes. And they say, you know what? I thought that this was a motivational thing that I was trying to do to help you to measure and monitor your child's behavior. I'm going to need to talk to my supervisor. I need to think about what else we could do. Practice has informed them that that didn't work. Practice has informed them that they need to have a bigger backpack of tools. Practice has said, it's okay not to know what to do, but you got to do something about that lack of knowledge. So they Google, so they come back to class, they stop and talk to you. And as soon as they have more resources, more research informed, they're ready to go back to practice again. And it's a cycle of learning and doing and learning and doing and learning from our doing. That's what this competency number 4 is about. Competency number 5, our macro practice students have no problem with this, right? They are really good at policy practice. Our direct practice students tend to say, well, I'm not sure how I'm going to do competency 5. I guess I'll go to social work day at the Capitol. Right? Maybe I need to talk to a legislator. I think I could schedule a meeting with one. Right? They're kind of stuck in what is policy about. And the reality is that there is a policy about everything. We live and breathe macro work. We live and breathe in policy in our practice. There is a policy about who has a key to the door. There is a policy about how we make money. in order to pay for the lights. And there's a policy about who's gonna pay the bills. And from what account or chart string we're gonna take that money from. There is a policy about confidentiality. There's a policy about when paperwork is due. There's a policy around who's eligible for services and when it's time to terminate. We have to learn the policies in order to do the practice. And so when you come up against a student who's just saying, oh, I think I'll go to social work day at the Capitol, please chuckle. Right? And say, oh, Heidi talked about that. Right? And help them rethink what is policy practice. Competencies 6, 7, 8, and 9 are very similar and very different. They all start with 1 or 2 words and finish with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. What's really important is the order of 6, 7, 8, 9. Why, we might say? It's actually on the LGSW exam. It's really important that students learn this order because it will shape their ability to choose the right answer when it comes to what will you do first. All right. So Connor, I can pick on Connor just a little bit as a former student. Connor, your paperwork is due. I need you to get that into me today by the end of the day. What's Connor likely to say? I know that when I turn my back and I walk away, Connor might say, and good morning to you too. Right? I hope you have a pleasant day. Now, if I engage Connor and I say, hi, Connor, how was your weekend?
So good, thanks for asking.
Awesome. Did you and your family enjoy your time at the park?
We did, but I'm more excited about getting that paper to you.
Oh, yeah, okay. You think you could have it in by 5 today?
Sure.
Awesome. So the difference is relational. The difference is that I engaged him. I assessed him. I might have said, do you have time today to get that paperwork into me? He might have said something along the lines of, I'm really struggling with understanding what that is. Do you think that we could meet and talk about it? Do you think that you could help me get it done? He might tell me something that I need to know so that when it comes to the intervention of actually getting it done, I have all the information as well. Right? And I might evaluate the experience of, did I get a good outcome? Did I not get a good outcome? Could I handle that different? Did that go well? Do I have faith that it's going to happen? Right? It's super important that we think about engagement. If we get to intervention and it's not working, what do we usually say? We need to go back and work on engagement. We need to go back and work on trust. We need to go back and start again. Because the roadblocks will go up on intervention if we haven't done those first parts right. We're going to take a break. Let's say 6 minutes. Please.
Temperature check, who is freezing? Yeah, all right. I'm gonna see if we can adjust the temperature a little bit.
I know. There's lots of soda and snacks and cookies. Please go and gather some.
I just make sure don't know. You know.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah.
So can I ask, with this setting? Oh, yeah. So I sounded. We look so. It's only your coursework. She just. I mean, yeah. And we could increase as much. Obviously.
Yeah, so one of the requirements is that clinical mental health has.
I didn't have one.
All of her anchor. Right. And removes. And I think that course.
I know that
it's one of the. So she will have. But she's like.
We didn't have the differentiations, and it was hard for me to walk through that scenario because I said that's not sure. Because I was advanced. And I actually went there. My advanced is my summer placement. And she would just I'm there, so you worked for me, so I'm there. And I was, okay, yeah, that's what I.
Awesome, good to know, good to remember.
Okay, that's, and I heard you say that in the email, but I wanted to just.
Like, yeah, it's been a hot, like, maybe even before that. Yeah.
It was
Very like.
there's no
Get it done.
during.
You're going to. She's not gonna be the birdie flying outside.
That works. Well, and you know, she's a little bit more. And what we're trying, I wanted to make sure.
Getting to the. We're always so in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they're not.
Space.
Yes. I'm so you're speaking that, so I can do it. A lot of yeah. I worked, yeah.
So they write that, they're like, that was fun.
Do I have? It's actually. Yeah, so like she's coming kind of art there. That'll be, she'll have a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can get a routine.
I put it up here. A little bit in there. Okay. They have.
Oh, cool.
Where are you these days?
Are they gonna do that?
I think it's.
Yeah.
And all of them.
So we can then go like.
You have one starting with Abby. I do, okay. Actually, four.
When my kids were born, I don't think we looked until.
And you're out of here. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're very good at this. Relax. We are very.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We're much more.
Some of this is what I want to do, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. It's great. Like, that's so nice and somebody from there. He was there. No, I was here to talk about the future one. That summer, it was just like, that was during that. Oh gosh, it was so. Yeah, of course, I had like my program of like, this needs to be fixed. Yeah, it was, I didn't have to serve. In the pool, I was in the pool there, taken to a pool. Had a key. I'll show up one day.
Yeah, I.
Extremely.
never know.
Because there's no protection for that vicarious conduction. No, it'd be good to say your finances going will pay for a whopping 4 sessions of therapy, but I was like, oh, that's progress, but could you at least like have people explain to you the process, why, you know, I think this might be out. So, of course, I was like excited. It's like the initial process. I spent a lot of time. And as soon as I got in that room. Instead of that, was failed. Yeah, so it was all worked out.
She's
Thanks
such
for
a grown-up.
asking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I was thinking about you.
yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, 4 more years until I have to do it again.
Yay. All right, let's check back in. Again, if you need to get up and get a beverage, we've got sodas in the fridge. We've got cookies on the table from Cookie Cart if you haven't had one yet. If you have had one yet, have another one if you want. Bags of chips. Chips are a food group. It's true. Well, they are in my world. All right, so I want to keep us on track because we've got a little bit of material and the practicum team would like to try and actually get done on time. You're all going, sure you will. No, we're gonna try and get done on time. Back to the code of ethics really briefly. And while we're on the subject, there is in your folder a cheat sheet that has the 6 core values on it. Don't open up your folder and look at it. Does anybody know what the 6 core values are?
Dignity and worth of the
Dignity and worth of the person. There's one.
Service.
Service, there's 2. Social justice. There's 3.
Relationships.
What about human relationships? They are important, right? They are. We want to practice with integrity. And the last one, we want to be in service to the community and our clients and each other. So we feel so important, feel that the code of ethics is so important that we actually incorporate it into our learning contract for our students. And we'll take a look in a minute on how we write that goal. It's included in every learning contract for our foundation and specialization students. So we use IPT or intern placement tracking system. Is anybody here not familiar with IPT? Yeah. All right. So the most important thing to know is that your student will be assigned, will have a practicum coordinator. That's me or Michelle or Katie or Ashley or Heidi. And if you get stuck or you have any questions, it is really easy for us to troubleshoot those issues. If we can't help you, Rosetta, who knows all and does all, can definitely fix the IPT stuff. It's pretty intuitive. We have all of our student forums on IPT. Students will often create a working document, Google Doc or something like that. But it's really, really important that you encourage them to use IPT to put that information. First of all, you have access to it like your student, and you can edit back and forth so that you're both able to keep the document in the same place. And we tell our students if it isn't an IPT and they lose it, they still have to put it back in there, right? So there are 4 forms that we're going to use in IPT. The first one is the initial practicum contract. And this is where you, the agency, and the student all contract together about the experience that they're going to have this year. This is the nuts and bolts contract. We want this done within 40 hours of the student starting their internship or by September 16th. This is where you are going to go back to what Heidi said at the beginning of our session, the big picture vision for what your student is going to learn at your agency. That is what opportunity they have, right? So in this document, there's a section about what the student's going to learn, what the population is. There is demographic information about you and the student. This is the document where you're going to talk about the days the student's going to work, the hours the student's going to work, the location the student's going to work. Are they in person? Are they virtual? Are they hybrid? How do you want to handle sick days or vacation days? Do you know when the student is going to take vacation? Are they going to take winter break? Are they going to take spring break? So having all those explicit conversations about work expectations, this is where you want to put it. There's also a checklist. You can go off that checklist to kind of talk about things like onboarding, technology, where's the student's work location, do they have computers, things like that. Safety is a big one. Almost all of our students express concerns about safety. So make sure you're having a very intentional conversation with them. All of the forms that we use require the student and their team to sign off. So as a practicum instructor or task supervisor, you will need to sign off on all of these documents. Try and pay attention to what you need to sign off on. I've got summer students finishing up right now, and a bunch of them are panicking because they want to either graduate or be done with their practicum. And we're waiting for task supervisors or practicum instructors to sign off on everything. So just a gentle nudge to remember to sign off on stuff. The next form we're going to talk about is the hours tracking form. So you may have an agency that requires your student to keep track of their hours, maybe for pay or just because that's how your agency does it. And that's fine. But students also need to track their hours in IPT. And we have an expectation that they are going to enter their hours at least once a week by Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. You, as a task supervisor or practicum instructor, have the responsibility to verify your students' hours and sign off at them at the end of the month. We've had a couple situations where practicum instructors or task supervisors didn't check in on those hours. And after 2 or 3 months, there was a discrepancy about what the students said they worked versus what the agency said they worked. So you can talk about this during supervision or set up another mechanism, especially if your student is doing an independent project outside of perhaps direct client contact. You really want to make sure that you guys have talked about how long that's going to take and your expectations. So students will, at the end of the year, at the end of their placement, sign off on the bottom of the hours form. They cannot do that until everything else is done because that ends their liability coverage. The student evaluation of placement is a form that gets sent to students on IPT at the end of the placement. And it's kind of a neat opportunity for you to get some agency feedback. Students will fill that out and they will be evaluating their placement. They'll be evaluating you as a practicum instructor. They'll be evaluating us as their practicum coordinators. And you'll have a chance to review that. And then we'll all sign off on it before the student leaves. And a lot of agencies have had students write a letter to the new interns, or they'll have students review the internship information that you have on IPT, just based on their experience and how they have had those opportunities in your agencies. The next the final form that we'll talk about on IPT is the learning contract. And this is where the meat and bones of their learning happens and is documented. So this is also an IPT. We're going to look at it in a minute. This is where we want their goals to be SMART. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. You guys know what SMART goals are. Let me show you what it looks like. All right. So I'm going to show you, this is a foundation learning contract, but it's the same format for a specialization contract. So there's demographic information at the top. This is kind of cool because it has the instructions right on the form. And so a lot of the information that we will talk about is actually here for you. When the initial learning contract is due, we say 100th hour. We also will say October, I think it's either the 14th or the 16th that it needs to be completed. Students are going to have plenty of time to work on this, including a 4-hour workshop day where we're going to be working with them. The mid-placement evaluation is due by either the last day of fall semester or their 220 or 300 hours. The end of placement after they've had at least 420 hours or 600 hours. The next section is an example of learning goals and strategies. So if you get stuck at kind of how this would be formatted, this is an idea. Most of you, if you've had students before, have a bank of sample learning contracts. We also have those. So if you want some ideas to kind of base your conversation with your student on, feel free to reach out to a practicum coordinator and we can share some examples with you. There's a social work competencies on here with some practice ideas on there. So those are all on there for you. And finally, how we rate students with our 4-point rating system, where 1 is not yet competent, 2 is approaching competence, 3 is competence, and 4 is they're demonstrating some mastery or advanced competence. What this looks like, this is the primary table. So you'll see right here on the first goal, we have written, over the course of the internship, I will examine and gain understanding about ethical issues related to my internship practice and be able to identify and resolve ethical dilemmas as they arise. So that's the goal. How the student is going to address that goal or the steps to competency will differ in your different settings because you all have different ethical situations. So you can see in the first column, that's where the goals are going to be. The goal box is the top box and the learning strategies is the next box. We want students to have a minimum of 5 goals, especially since we write one of them for them. With the specialization students, they should probably plan on a total of 6 goals because they're also going to have an evaluation goal. So we want them to have 4 learning strategies for each goal. And students get really, really into the weeds about this. What we tell them is that your goal is the big skill. When you leave your internship, you want these skills that you're going to take with you in your toolbox, right? And so those skills, so say your student wants to be able to do an independent diagnostic assessment by the time that they leave their internship. That would be their goal. Or your student wants to do an independent community event by the end of their placement. That would be the goal. Their learning strategies are how they're going to know that they know that. How are they going to move towards competency? So using the independent event example, obviously the first thing your student does is not have an independent event, do an independent event. So what they might do is they might review the agency's policies or practices. They might, as a learning strategy, they might look at former events that the agency has done. They might talk through in supervision or in group consultation or with other practitioners in the agency what kind of events they have done. They might plan the event that they're going to do and have their practicum instructor provide feedback. And finally, they will do the event and have their practicum instructor, task supervisor watching them or giving them feedback. The same might be true with the diagnostic assessment. So The student is going to learn the policy that the agency has. They're going to watch a practitioner do a diagnostic assessment. They're going to talk about it in supervision and maybe do some role play. Then they might do a diagnostic assessment with their practicum instructor shadowing, and finally they'll do it independently. So there's a developmental framework, right? That's what the learning strategies are. A lot of those learning strategies might be the same from goal to goal. The smart part of this is not, I'm going to watch a TED Talk on ethics, right? They like that one a lot. Or I will review the code of ethics. Sure you will. So those learning strategies are really where we want to see them be specific about how they know and how you know that they know what they know when they know it. Once the goals are written, we want to have all of these 9 competencies need to be addressed in their learning contract. Not every goal is going to have every competency. And in fact, for a lot of our direct practice students, they'll just write a specific goal regarding policy because, as Heidi said, they kind of go, eh. But most of the goals will represent several competencies. The middle section here, mid-placement comments, there's a box for the student to evaluate themselves, the practicum instructor, and the task supervisor to do the evaluation. And then there's a column here for the mid-placement rating, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then you'll see the final comment box column and then the final placement ratings. Underneath the goal section, you'll see initial learning contract. So after you guys create the learning contract, you're going to sign off on it. I'll review it and sign off on it. The mid-placement evaluation, we've got some extended general feedback boxes here, and then you're going to sign off. You're going to want to check work has been satisfactory to date, or work has not been satisfactory, or no credit will be given this grading period. If you have a student where you're considering work has not been satisfactory, completed, or no credit, those are red light situations. So please reach out to us before you get to the point of rating a student that way. And then the section at the bottom is the final section. In your folders, there is a worksheet. We're not going to do that today, but there's a worksheet that has goals on it, and you can use that to jot down some ideas about goals based on the opportunities that students have in your agency. If there's more than one of you, so for instance, school-based people or clinic-based people, your agency probably has some sample learning contracts that you can hit up. The one thing I'll say about this is that this is work that your student needs to do. They will do it in consultation with you, but they need to drive the learning process. You may have 2 students in the same clinic or the same placement. They may have very different learning contracts because they may have different skills that they want to emphasize or develop. Is there any questions about this? I know I went through it pretty fast, but yeah. Oh.
Just one question. I'm making an assumption that our students are having an internship that lines up with what the internship, like I focus in mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that my student is in the mental health track.
Yes, your student will be in the mental health track.
Okay.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah, we try and sort that. That's actually a really good question. We try to sort that out. So when they're interviewing, they're not actually allowed to interview for placements that are outside of their track. And trust me, they get really disappointed about that because the macro placements are so awesome. Yeah.
How do you set expectations with students about like what to expect at the different evaluation points, particularly the midpoint evaluation, where the scores might not be high?
Right.
And like I just want to have an understanding of like how on your end expectations are being set.
Sure. So the first thing I tell my students about it is not A, B, C, D, because graduate students are high achieving students and they want that A on everything. This is about competency. So we're really clear with our students that at the mid-placement, they are not yet competent. And so they're going to get a 2, 1 or a 2 where they're approaching competency. If they're getting a 3 or a 4 at the mid-placement evaluation, their tasks are not challenging enough. They need more depth, right? We don't want them to coast through the second half of their internship. We want that learning to be deep all the way through. And we're going to talk about this in November, especially how to deal with the eager beavers who are like, I want to do all the things. That evaluation should be a 10,000 foot look at the state of the internship. So really talking about how is it going, reviewing the supervision structure, looking at their work as a whole. It's a great point to kind of reset and see how, you know, the learning style is still being suited. Other questions? Yeah.
Similarly, I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about how the U interprets the like 1 through 4 scale. I know
Sure.
that we work with interns from multiple programs, and it like each school kind of has its own rating scale and its own idea about like what is, like you said, like a red light situation might be different than my idea of a red light situation.
Yeah.
And I hear you say that, you know, at the midpoint there might be some scores that are 1s or 2s. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that is a red light situation. Can you just say a little bit more about how the U is interpreting that scale?
Yeah. So first of all, we're doing it right. I think so. It's so subjective in some ways. Has anybody here had an intern that really struggled? Okay. So if you have an intern who really seems to be stuck at we need hand holding for every single thing. If you have an intern who is struggling to understand the basic mission or carrying out independent tasks, MSW students are supposed to be doing independent MSW level work. If they seem like they're really struggling with those ongoing tasks, they're not really moving out of the onboarding and training phase. With the macro students, we tend to see that more as moving into the independent work where, you know, you're able to trust that if you give them a task that they're doing it. They're not coming back to you and checking in every 2 minutes. With the clinical students, that means that they're done with shadowing and they're moving into doing the work independently. We're always available to consult. And so, you know, we'll do a liaison visit in the fall, we'll do a liaison visit in the spring, but honestly, that's literally what I get paid to do. So I am happy to meet and talk about students and their progress. I would say that as social workers in the practice, if you have a student and you're just like, something isn't clicking, they're not connecting, there's a reason why you feel that way. And by the way, if you have a student who's a real rock star, knocking it out of the park, that's a whole different kettle of fish and pretty stressful. I had a really, really sharp student and she kept me on my toes as a practicum instructor all year. It was great. And also every time she asked me a question, I felt like, let me think about that. Let me look it up. I'll get back to you. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to talk a little bit about supervision styles.
All right, how are we doing on this Monday, Junior? Awesome. So inside your folder, we are going to do a little group activity really quickly before we dive into supervision. Inside your folder, you'll see two pieces of paper that say making the elements of effective supervision from reality. Okay, so you should have 2 sheets. One will say group 1 on the front, the other one will say, and then group 2 on the back. The other sheet will say group 3 and group 4 on the back. There is a reason why you all have groups 1 through 4 in your folder. Okay, even though we're going to go through this will be group 1, and this will be group 4. Your group 3. Yeah. I'll say the joke that I said earlier, there's nothing like good old fashioned confusion that'll just wait you right on. So, you all are group 4. Now, everyone has all group papers in their package. And the rationale is, when and if you hit a roadblock with your student and it's relating to supervision, you'll have access to these tools and the notes that we're all gonna take together. We're just gonna go through each group individually. They'll be the group that responds in particular to whatever group they're assigned to, okay? Everybody confused enough? Got it. All right. So when we are thinking about supervision, group 1, what do you think your students need to know about the agency? From a supervisory perspective, what should a student come to your agency in supervision and know?
To us already knowing.
Nope. In supervision, what is the knowledge that they should develop at least about the agency? From the agency perspective. What say you?
Let's say like the norms kind of
Okay. So organizational norms, say more about that.
I think the communication patterns of, like we were mentioning, what does somebody do with time off? How do you communicate if you're stepping away from the office?
Okay. So policies.
Yeah, policies.
Now, is there, so I think what I'm also hearing you say is that if I have a question about who I submit my hours to, I shouldn't go to the CEO if I'm a student, right?
Yes.
Why not? Go to the CEO. Why shouldn't I go as a student? Why shouldn't I go to the CEO for them to sign up on my hours? It's a redundant question if you're actually trying to figure it out. You shouldn't. You should know who is who within the agency. So I'm your practicum instructor. I'll be signing off on your hours. This is your task supervisor. They'll be making sure that you're going through your day-to-day tasks and things of that nature. So when you're thinking of the agency element from a supervisory perspective, you want your student to know who is who in the organization. I might have a question. Am I just gonna go ask somebody random in the organization this question? Maybe you have a very friendly organization, but infrastructure is very important for your student to know. Do you all have an orientation program? Okay, so maybe they need to know the dates and things affiliated with that. What else might they need to know about the elements of the agency?
Bathroom. The logistics of.
Where am I supposed to relieve myself? Okay. So layout of facility. Okay. What else do you guys think?
All of our staff and interns are 100% remote.
Okay.
So, I mean, everything that comes along with like how to operate your computer, how to reach, or how do you get a hold of or your task supervisor? What am I supposed to be doing? I'm just like thinking of like an intern or a new employee just sitting at home with their computer in front of them, like, what am I supposed to be doing?
Absolutely. So from an agency perspective, our students should come into your space knowing, when my computer crashes, who do I call for IT? Right? So, and the reason why we all have these papers is because you all are supposed to be taking notes in terms of what we're saying. You might hit this roadblock, you might not. Maybe not everyone here is, remote or something of that nature. So you might not hit the same roadblock. But the hope is that these resources and these things that we're talking about will just be a tool you all need. Better have it than not. Better have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Okay, let's move on to group 2. Tell me a little bit about what should a student know about the elements of the tasks and assignments associated.
The purpose of the task,
Why am I doing this?
how it connects to the work.
Okay. Connection to the work. Okay. What else?
Like the expectations about what the finished product should look like, or
what we're looking for in a finished product.
Okay, so expectations of the finished product or final deliverable.
And also not just connection to the work, but also connection to their goals, their goals in IPT, but also their professional goals.
Okay,
And that part of how it's driven by them.
yeah, so how does this relate to my professional goals? And kind of going back to the one that was just said before, should the janitor be signing off on my case notes? I asked a lot of redundant questions. It's okay. No. So the task, we need to know what is that, who is that process, who all are the important people in this process for me to make sure that my work is done and complete. All right, let's take one more about assignments and activities or tasks. What should our students know from a supervisory perspective? What do you want to make sure they're equipped with knowing?
I think this is really specific, but it's billing to insurance.
Huh?
Billing to insurance.
Billing to insurance. So say a little bit more about that. Be a little bit more specific.
Like understanding, maybe not like what each and every single individual code means, but like why we do the paperwork in a way in order to get reimbursed, kind of like how it all, how we get paid as an agency from the insurance companies. And probably a lot of us bill insurance.
So what I'm hearing you say is our interns or our students need to be equipped with the knowledge of the They need to know this service occurs because we see them in person. We fill out this case note, our supervisor signs off of it. It meets the criteria, the CPT code or whatever code is accurate and correct. By the end of the week, it needs to be in, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we get reimbursed and paid for services and keep these things afloat. So some of that information might like more specifically divvy into the micro or the macro. It's all important. The logistics of how to run and be an organization are important for the learning process. Absolutely. Let's move into group 3. When you think of the supervisory skill set, what should you be equipped with or what should just be there in the context of supervisory skills? Open door policy?
Just if they have any concerns to bring it up and mention it, to discuss that.
Okay, so open door policy. Earlier, we had someone say open communication. And I'm gonna kind of ask you a little bit more about that one, group 3. So I'm gonna say open door. Open communication. What happens when you say that?
Putting limitations on it.
There it is. Okay, professional boundary. Because I guarantee you that we may have some students, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing in per se, but we might have some students that will hear the words open communication, open door policy. They go experience something in the field, it brings something up, and now all of a sudden we're in a therapy session. I don't know what they think. Which is not necessarily wrong. But if it's navigated with professional boundaries, it can become a productive tool of learning. Right, excellent. What else would you say needs to be present for supervisory skill? I think you were gonna say something.
I mean, I think they should know a little bit about the background of the supervisor and maybe growth-minded that the supervisor might not know all the things and how are we gonna access that information when we need it.
So, background, maybe style. So how do you prefer them to communicate with you? Should they call you every time something happens or is something meant to be an email? Okay. Let's do one more.
I think instead of, I was thinking like when I do clinical supervision, I do a contract, right? You know, like, when are we gonna meet? How long are we gonna meet? So like expectations.
Yeah.
Okay. So what should I expect from you? I'm gonna just do. What should I expect from you? What should you expect from me in the context of supervision? Okay. We also had something really powerful said yesterday that I'm just carrying into all of our other sessions. If I as a student can trust you with my mistakes, I can trust you with my growth. That conversation, if I make a snafu or whatever the issue is, that conversation is gonna live in my head for the majority of my career. Because when I made a mistake, I had a supervisor that said, well, here's how we're gonna modify this, and here's how we're gonna change moving forward. So for the rest of that person's career, they're gonna always carry that moment where you held them when they made a mistake, okay? Now, when we're looking at, we're gonna move to group 4. Group 4, what say you about the elements that are needed as it relates to the actual supervisory meeting, the supervision meeting itself? What's important there for this meeting? Cadence. I didn't know I was supposed to meet with you every week. What are you talking about? What else?
Also, that you would set up them in that space, do you need them to set? Some supervisors want them to set an agenda, sometimes we wanna just go on what's important that day, everybody's, you know, our styles are different, so. Clear expectation of, clear communication, clear expectation.
Okay, how is this meeting gonna be structured? I want you as a student to come here with an agenda. Once a month, I need us to do a case presentation that has this element, that element, that element. This is what it should look like, and this is what you should expect after you do that case presentation. Excellent. What about you?
I think being able to identify like triggers, I mean, very specifically, I work in the ED and ICU, and I had a foundation student last year, and I said, you know, read some of the notes. I'd like you to do the assessment, but if at any point you feel uncomfortable, I'm the one getting paid, you're not. So if there's something that's too triggering, because I mean, there's some really dark stuff we deal with.
Yeah.
And if you're not getting paid and you're already stressed at school,
Mhm.
I can go and take that.
Whose role is what? Okay, so we're gonna say scope.
And also telling them like they don't need to put up with any verbal abuse. That's the wonderful thing with working in the hospital. Somebody gets escalated, we just leave and we let security deal with it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of just coin that as delegation. So when things hit a certain threshold in your organization, you say, you know what? You're the student. I'm gonna transition this off of your caseload to mine because I need to take it over. Very good. Okay. So thank you for entertaining the good old fashioned confusion so that we can wake up a little bit just before we get out of here. The next segment of this is gonna kind of give you the information about supervision. Now, it's okay if one agency does supervision one very strict and specific way, and another agency says, you know what, we like to let the connection build up relationally, and we want it to be authentic. So we don't really have our interns meet with an agenda and this rigid schedule, and that's okay. Everything has a utility for something. So the hope is that you all are not walking away thinking, oh man, we got to create an agenda. I've never done that before. It's not that. If it's helpful, let it be helpful. And if it's not, use it for when it will be. Now, the actual structure of supervision of what we're expecting is that our students are going to meet with you or a task supervisor once a week. Now that responsibility, if there's a task supervisor associated, then that time can be split. So maybe they do 1 hour of clinical supervision with you on a Friday, and the next Friday they meet with their task supervisor. That's okay. Also, if you have a group, like a cohort of interns, let's say you've got 5 or 6 interns from across schools or whatever the situation is, half of that time can be spent in group supervision. It doesn't always have to be individual, but at least half of it has to be done individual, okay? Now, we kind of talked about like why it's important or what needs to be there, but it is important to discuss the expectation from you, how they should show up. How they show up on day 1 might be radically different from how they show up on day 200, okay? The expectation is that they're gonna grow or at least modify the way that they show up appropriately, okay? Now, in that, you might wanna ask them, do you wanna show up with agenda items? Are there things that you want me to be prepared to answer for you? Maybe it's related to agency outline and structure. Maybe it's related to logistical process. Maybe it's related to something else. But what do you as a student want me to show up with so that I can support you in your learning? If it's unrealistic, it's okay to have that conversation too. You know, I can't show up with all of the information you need to do your work for, et cetera, okay? Now, just a high level, what this part of the remaining piece of the supervision is going to go through is what is an expectation? It's just a shared understanding that you're gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. What happens when an expectation is broken? We're gonna talk a little bit about how to have a difficult conversation too. Intercultural, this is more of a supervisory approach rather than a style. But we are asking that you all make sure that you carve out the time for the conversation about cultural differences, right? There might be some folks that show up and didn't have to think about race until they became a social worker. There might be some of your students that are very acutely aware that they show up as X, Y, and Z in this world. Maybe it intersects with their clients radically different. Maybe it's in a way that it's a shock to both them and the client, maybe yourself. But the idea here is that we want to start having the conversation that you all need to have that conversation with them. And that's okay. We're going to go over styles. There are 3 different types of supervision styles that we're going to ask you to just pick whichever works for you. And then we're going to talk about, just very briefly, what does it mean to prepare? So are we going to use an agenda? Are we going to use something else? Let me ask this question. Do you all know what intersectionality is? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. With the assumption that maybe we just need some common knowledge. There are 7 layers of a person's identity that show up through the form of positionality. At any given point, all of those positionality layers might converge at one way that a person shows up in this world. That also might mean that they might be treated differently based on some layers of that positionality. They could be a cisgender presenting person, but there might be something else to their layer of identity. But the way they navigate the world might be radically different. Vice versa for their clients. What does that mean when it shows up in supervision? It means we have to have a conversation, right? And that last layer of differences is kind of embedded in that. Now, intercultural supervision is not just about what shows up for your student in the field of social work. It is also about how the power dynamics show up with you. We heard, unfortunately, about the story that we have a student that is ready to graduate, and they might not. Might. We're big advocates for our students, so I say might because of that. You all have a huge power differential with our students. They often have said to us, well, I'm just an intern. I have no power. We try to hold that balance of saying, well, not quite. You have some power. You have some advocacy. We don't want them showing up at your agency like, look, all of this got to change now. We don't want them showing up like that, but we do want them showing up, being able and comfortable to ask you questions, to disagree in an effective and professional way. To have those conversations of like, listen, if I disagree with you, does that mean you're going to fail me when it gets to 2 weeks before my graduation? And I'm not implying that that's what happened earlier, but please be mindful that our students are coming into your placement thinking and knowing that there's a power differential, a big one. Okay. Now, the 3 types of supervision styles are administrative, clinical, and reflective. The first one, administrative, and I think you kind of touched a little bit on just the logistics. That's what's important, not only what's important, but our students need to know that. I had a supervisor that only did administrative work. That's it. That's all we sat there and talked about, and it worked for what it worked for. It didn't work for what it didn't work for. But administrative supervision is important. It is centering the paperwork, centering the logistics. How does this service create one episode for us to get billed and reimbursed and et cetera, et cetera? It is the administrative part that says on Friday, within 7 days of your service being completed, your notes need to be in. Maybe that's the agency policy, but maybe you as a supervisor say that might be the agency policy. However, I need to make sure that your notes have everything in it that they should for it to be billable and for it to be a qualified service. So I want you to have your notes to me within 2 days of completing the service. That administrative part of the supervisory session is giving them that information so that they know what needs to get done logistically. That's essentially this style of supervision. And that's okay if you flux between the 2 or 3. Second, clinical supervision. This might be, not news to your ears, but I'll still have to go through it. Clinical supervision essentially looks at what should be there and what should not be there in the context of writing, the process of giving a service, what should be, prioritized in the order of urgency. Who wants to read 17 pages of identifying information on a client for a DA? Raise your hand. Some agencies might want that. They need to understand that at your agency, You know, 2 really well-written paragraphs can say a lot. We don't need to write 17 pages and have all of these, all this information, because guess what? Your client's records might be subpoenaed one day. And if you put 17 pages of their life story in it, all of that can be used against them. Those are some conversations and topics that come up in clinical supervision, but that's the place that you want them to understand what modality. I know that you might have a person that's not 100% therapy based, but maybe your agency uses a modality of motivational interviewing. That's not necessarily a 100% clinical modality just for therapy, but your agency might do that to help your clients move from one stage of change to the next. In clinical supervision, what kind of words do you need to be hearing out for when you're trying to see if your client is in one stage of change to the next? How are we going to know when they're ready to move from here to there? That's what clinical supervision is about, helping them process what those modalities could look like, should look like, will show up as, etc. Okay. And lastly, the reflective and supportive supervision is, you know, when you first walked into that house and you saw 4 generations of a family living in that one house, what did that bring up for you? What did you think about that? Have you ever seen that before? How might a family with 4 generations in a house, how might they navigate some of their cultural norms in the way that it affects our services? The reflective supervision is really the style that allows them to process out loud and think about things. That might be where you ask them, have you ever seen this before? What have you seen when you have seen this before, and what was done? Or is this your first time seeing a client that has all 4 generations behind them living in one house? That's one example, but the reflective style of supervision, it really allows that critical reflection to show up. And when we say critical reflection, it's not just that simple like, yeah, I think that's different. Why would you say different? What do you mean by different? Tell me, what is different a good thing? Is different a bad thing? It's that time for you to go deep into what they're saying, okay? Any questions about the supervisory styles or anything we've talked about this far? Okay, silence meaning consent to move forward, got it? Okay, we are not gonna do that because I wanna give Katie some time. So this slide and the recording will be made available to you. So when it is, these are some resources that if you need some additional clinical support, if you need some cultural sensitivity supports, this will be some good sources for you, as well as these books. These are really great tools to use alongside your intern if they're having difficulty having difficult conversations, or if they're struggling understanding things like, for example, racialized trauma or things of that nature, okay? Now that we're talking about it, I am going to do my best to give Katie enough time to get through the material.
4:30.
4:30, because my brain said 4 and it's Monday Junior. Okay, I take that back. I am going to slow down a little bit. Thank you for saving me.
You've done it 4.
I do. I'm like, oh, I'm looking at that clock and it's looking at me, and I'm looking at that clock and it's looking at me. Okay. Oh, all right, I can breathe. So, having the difficult conversation. Raise your hand if you like to have difficult conversations. Oh, all right. Write a book and I'm going to read it. Because earlier we asked that question, everybody's face just looked like, not I, said the cat. Nobody really likes to have difficult conversations. You might feel prepared to have them, but nobody really likes to have difficult conversations. The example of Kelly's student, we should have had a difficult conversation a long time ago with this practicum instructor. And not because something was wrong with the practicum instructor. We just should have had the difficult conversation a lot sooner. One, it saves your student a whole lot of error. It saves them a whole lot of absence and knowing I need to be a little bit more aware of whatever the situation is. I'll use another example that we also try to avoid. Hey, Jenna, you know that Heidi over there? No, right? Right. What did I just do?
Gossip.
Gossip, that's the informal word for it, yes.
Right.
Boom. Our students will triangulate, not on purpose. They're building the relationship. They're building a relationship with us. We only get them for 2 years, maybe at max, depending on the circumstance. They're building a relationship with you. They might come to you and say, you know what, you're my clinical supervisor. I might feel safe enough to tell you that I don't like this situation happening. What we need to do, hey, Heidi,
Yeah.
Can you join me in a conversation very quickly? So I was talking with Jenna and I had a lot of concerns about, you know, my hours report. I'm not getting them in on time and Jenna's not gonna allow me to submit my hours. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it'll be okay. We'll need to figure out a solution to that together.
Gotcha, thanks. Radically different. There was a lot that was said between. Heidi. Yeah, cool. There's a big difference there. Our students will unintentionally triangulate. And it's not because of intention, it's not because of character, maybe it is, but maybe it's not. The assumption that I want you all to carry is that our students might naturally just want to find a way to build a relationship with you, and triangulation might happen, okay? Yeah, please.
What would you say in a situation, if Jenna was the supervisor?
Yeah.
And Heidi's having a problems with you?
As a student?
Yeah.
If Heidi is having a problem with me, like in Heidi's course?
Sorry, like I was trying to match up the.
Yes, oh yeah.
But so like if the two people of staff, if
Yes,
Heidi's like, Jenna, your supervisee is doing a bunch of wrong stuff.
like Heidi, let's have a conversation with our student.
Okay,
Yeah,
same thing.
same thing. Yeah, the idea there is that if we are having a conversation about difficult feelings or difficult things with somebody else that's not in the space, we need to pull them into that space. Because we might be operating on bias, assumption, so many other things. The goal is to bring that person, that third leg or fourth leg, or how many other people, the goal is to bring them into the conversation.
That's really helpful, because when I was doing it last year, my take was, that's a YouTube thing, not a me thing. And so that's nice that it's a us thing that I was.
Yeah, and that's a great example on why some of this stuff happens very unintentionally. It's just like, nope, I get paid, but I don't get paid for that. You know, so having the difficult conversation. If you all leave with anything today, I'm hopeful that you all leave with some tools to have difficult conversations with your folks. Not just about the work that they're doing, but also about what they might see in the work that they'll be doing in the field or in practice. So there are 5 general types of oppression that occur. I'm just gonna cut straight to the core and say that powerlessness is going to be the system of oppression that your student might struggle with the most. Your student might show up and say, I am going to fix hunger. Nobody should go hungry. What happens when they show up and they try to work with an oppressed group of people who don't have access to food? And because of whatever income they might have or whatever stuff they have set up, the system has these guidelines that continues to cut them off from getting access to the things that they need. Your student might struggle with experiencing not necessarily powerlessness from them. There's some secondary layer there, but you might have to be equipped to have a conversation about a layer of oppression that is occurring with their clients. That you as a person can't fix in the immediacy, they can't fix with immediacy. You have to be equipped to have that conversation at least. And when I say equipped, I mean literally just, what are you thinking about that? How do you feel about that? What are the options here? Things of that nature. Now, the 5 different types are exploitation, which is essentially saying, you know what? I got an agency. I'm gonna get 15 different interns. I'm gonna pay them nothing, and they're gonna generate so much money for me. Sometimes it happens, but I did more of a facetious breakdown of what that would be. But it's the unequal exchange of services for goods and information. Cultural imperialism might be more formally understood as appropriation. Oh, you know what? I like what that community is doing. Even though it's a cultural norm, I'm going to take it and make it my own. Therefore, I'm going to brand it as so and so and so and so. Your students are going to see that in the field. They're going to see the impacts of cultural imperialism in other layers. Some pieces, like violence, they might see. I'll give you an example from last academic year. I had a student that was working with some domestic violence. They could not understand why their client would not leave their abuser. Right? Because to the unaffected brain and the unaffected mind, why can't they just leave? This makes no sense. When a person is being oppressed, you as a supervisor might need to have a deeper conversation on what that means and why a person might show up through that layer of trauma and not leave their abuser, for example, okay? Now, let's say we get to that point where there are some problematic or concerning behaviors for your actual student. And now we need to be ready to have that conversation. Before you go into it, I want to equip you with the knowledge of 3 triggers that might come up for your student. And it might even come up for you because sometimes getting feedback is hard, right? The first thing is emotional. So you might be emotionally triggered by receiving feedback. Your student might be emotionally triggered by receiving feedback. And usually what triggers them, let me see if you all can, I don't think you can see this because of the box. It's the content. You know what? This service, when you said that, when you showed up in this manner, when you, whatever specific thing it is, that wasn't okay. And they might be emotionally triggered by it. They might be scared. They might be nervous. Oh no, I'm about to fail. Oh no, I'm about to get fired from my practicum placement and I won't be graduating, and et cetera, et cetera. That's a difficult conversation to have. But if you go into the conversation knowing that they're likely going to be triggered possibly by the content, emotionally, you can better equip and guide them through receiving that feedback, okay? The relationship. So, you know, Jenna, you and I, we built a really good relationship as your student, and you're gonna take some PTO because you don't wanna burn out and we need you to come back. So Connor is gonna supervise you for the next week. I don't know Connor. I didn't like the way that Connor said hi to you one time, so I just kind of assumed that Connor was not really a nice person. But you have me reporting to Connor. Connor saw something very beneficial for me to know and learn as a student. But the relationship that I have with Connor might serve as a barrier because of preconceived notions or whatever it is. So Connor might be giving me some really good feedback as a student about what I could be doing better or where I could grow. But because of the relationship I have with Jenna, I trust Jenna. Jenna has helped me become and figure out and learn X, Y, and Z. But because of the relationship that I don't have with Connor, all of the feedback that Connor's giving me, I might not be willing to receive it. Now, the way that you can navigate that is, Jenna, when you come back, so Connor gave me the report of X, Y, and Z. What are you thinking about the feedback that Connor gave? Well, would it be different if it came from me? Yeah, it would, because I trust you, Jenna. Well, let's talk about why that might be. Sometimes it's okay to receive feedback from people that we don't have that solid relationship with. It might be a little hand-holding at first, but at least it's to name it. Because if they're aware that I'm only going to receive feedback from people that I trust, that's going to be a line of weakness in their professional career. Because our clients are going to give us feedback. Our clients are not going to like us. We're going to show up. And sometimes our clients are going through so much that the way that they show up with us, we might take it personal too. So the hope is if you're aware that that emotional trigger as well as that relationship trigger is going to show up, you can be equipped. Then lastly, the identity piece, I think, comes up. I would say for me, it's come up in my work with my students a little bit, but it's still worth you all knowing. The identity trigger is essentially a type of trigger that shows up when you give someone information and it activates something internally about themselves. When you said that you were disappointed in me, it reminded me of when my father said that they were disappointed in me when I was a child and I just shut down. I'm not saying that it should turn into a therapy session at that point, but if someone discloses that, or you see that that's what's going on, you can subvert it, you can name it, and you can say, you know what, I see that you're struggling to deal with this. Is there another way I could have said that? Is there another way I could have offered you this feedback? Okay, here's the objective content of what I'm wanting you to see from this information. Now you know what the triggers are. How are you going to give the feedback? There are 3 different types of feedback. One is appreciation. Appreciation is essentially an expression of value for a person's work or impact. It also comes in the form or sentiment of a description of how they've shown up or what they've done that's made that type of impact. What's your name?
Brittany.
Brittany. You know, Brittany, I have some feedback for you, but before I start, I just want to let you know, I really appreciate how you show up for your clients. You're very intentional, the way that you listen to them, the way that you summarize what they're going through, and you're very skilled at getting them connected to resources. I just want you to know that I appreciate that. In that process of observing, there's one piece that I wanted you to focus on still. I want you to know that you're doing great here, but here are some areas for growth for you to start working in this area. I'm just mumbling it at this point. But the idea there, a person is more willing to be vulnerable in their growth process through the mechanism of appreciation, right? Now, The second type is coaching. Now, coaching varies in the context of appreciation. It's more of an approach to provide ideas or suggestions to improve the receiver's delivery method. It can be either a subjective or an objective statement that gives them information on how to change something for the long haul. So this is very similar to like maybe a sport. You know, this skill is doing really good, but if you do it this way, you might get better results. If you modify the way that you write this, instead of writing all of that and join this type of description for the client, your notes might come out a lot quicker and you might feel a little bit more confident in what you're writing. Coaching is just really giving them some suggestions and skills along the way for them to find a end product. And then lastly, evaluation. This is generally a holistic process of examining something. What this type of feedback does, it lets your student know all of the things and the processes that you are watching without verbally saying it to them. How would it feel if I said, hey, Erin, you know, I've watched you from start to finish for the last 17 hours, and here's the information that I've gathered from it. As opposed to saying, you know, Erin, when you submitted this process and completed this piece of paper, this paperwork, and it included all of these things, this was able to produce this result. What that subconsciously says to the person receiving that feedback is that they are in a process and they're being monitored at any given point, not necessarily for like a ulterior motive or something negative, but they're being monitored. And what you give that feedback from the evaluation method, it lets them know at this point in the process, I could have been a little stronger. At this point in producing something, I messed up, but that's okay. This is how we can fix it, okay? My main goal in giving you all this information is to ask you to have the difficult conversation before it is too late for our students. I am very happy to respond to an email 1 week after meeting my student if you are finding a concern. I am very happy to get involved, not in a way that's more punitive, but I want to know what is going on with our students. I think our team will say the same thing. The sooner we know, the sooner that we can mitigate, as opposed to 1 week before graduation, okay? All right, Katie.
Okay, we have one more topic for you, and then we're gonna start wrapping things up with important dates, timelines, things for you to think about. So let's go with the 5 stages of a successful internship. Anyone familiar with this concept? If you've been around, you probably have. But this is well documented and researched by Schweitzer and King, so feel free to look them up if you want to do some more reading on this. There are books out there. This will be a very brief overview. Okay, we talked to our students about these stages, so we figured it would be helpful for you to know about them as well. Now, starting off, the first stage, anticipation. A lot of these stages are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll go over them anyway. So this is the stage that your student is likely in right now. They're nervous, they're excited, they have a lot of questions, a lot of wonderings. They're wondering, what is this internship really going to be like? What kind of work am I actually going to be doing? Are the people there going to be nice? Am I going to have to pay for parking? You know, they're going to have so many questions, right? In this stage, they typically are anxious to do things or at least have something to do, right? And you might have to hold them back a little bit for a while. So the task accomplishment is pretty low in this stage. They're still learning, they're still absorbing information. We tell our students in this stage, it's really important for you to work with your supervisor to establish what are my goals going to be, what are the expectations here, set good boundaries, develop good relationships with your supervisor, with your colleagues, with your clients, you know, start off on the right foot here, right? Because if you don't, we run into issues, right? And that's the next stage. Disillusionment, okay? And that, you know, is kind of what it sounds like. That's the gap that happens between when a student has a certain expectation versus what it actually is, right? So that could be really big for some students or very small. It could be related to maybe the client population they're working with. Maybe they think, oh, I really wanted to work in the hospital. I thought I would really enjoy it. turns out it's like way too fast paced and I don't get to spend any time with my clients and I want to build long-term relationships. This is a change in what they were expecting. So they might be facing some disillusionment. It could be something more significant. Like I thought I was going to have this person as my supervisor and now it's someone else and we don't vibe and I don't know what they want from me. And all of these other things, right? This is a really tough stage to be in. It happens for every student in some way, right? And you might not even realize that it's happening. Your student might just be going about their business in a normal fashion. But trust me, it's happening. Probably like in October, things start to kind of fall off the track for them a little bit, right? Things get more stressful with school. They don't have as much time maybe for their internship. And this starts to happen. We tell our students that they really need to address this stage to work through it. They probably are going to have some difficult conversations with you or you with them. Some students are really good at bringing this stuff up. Others, not so much. You might kind of have to pull it out of them. You seem a little off lately, or, this seems to be troubling you. Should we talk about that? You might have to pull it out of them a little bit, but trust me, it's going to be there, right? And that's when we move to the next stage, confrontation, which is not as scary maybe as it sounds. It might just be having that difficult conversation, right? But basically this stage really emphasizes that they have to confront the disillusionment, right? Whether that's on their own internally through some processing, or maybe it's externally with you or a colleague, another intern, to talk about what they're going through, right? They need to reassess their goals, figure out what their expectations are going to be moving forward, establish some boundaries if they haven't done that before, and get kind of all this stuff sorted out, right? And it's important to note that, this is outlined in a very linear fashion. It doesn't always happen that way, right? Sometimes students go back and forth between disillusionment and confrontation, right? Different things come out over the course of the year. They might slip back into disillusionment and have to address it again, right? It's not necessarily a linear process. But thankfully, once they move through these stages, they enter competence, which is the stage we all dream about, right? This is the vision. This is when your student can do things independently. They know what they're doing. You can trust them to do stuff. This is probably happening in the spring semester, maybe earlier. Well, who knows? They're feeling really good about their internship. They're putting in a lot of time, a lot of energy. You're seeing results. And generally things are going well, right? They're not perfect by any means. Of course, none of us are. They're still learning, right? But we can say that they are competent, right? You can sign off on that learning agreement that things are going well, right? And at the end, we have culmination. And it's really important to draw out and make note of this stage as well, to give them time, and yourself, to process the end, right? We don't want them to just walk out on the last day not having done any reflecting, not having provided any feedback, not finishing their case notes or any documentation that you need from them. They need to practice saying goodbyes, right? And be respectful and professional. How do you terminate with clients and your colleagues, and thank your supervisor for everything they've done for you and your colleagues? That's a really important stage. It's also kind of a tough stage for everyone because it's really bittersweet, right? Like you've spent this entire academic year with this intern, them with you. They're probably excited to graduate and move on, but they're also probably really nervous about it and scared. And they're sad to be leaving their colleagues and their fellow classmates. So it's a tough stage, right? I think it's worth noting too that this is framed in the context of the student, but I think as supervisors, you all go through these stages, right? You start right now, you're like really excited about having a student. That's why you're here, hopefully. You have really big dreams, expectations. And then once they start, you realize, oh, this is maybe not quite how I thought it was going to be. They're going to need a lot more training in this one area. Oh my gosh, they don't know how to use Google Docs. Okay, this is going to be a problem, right? Like you figure things out, you have to confront them, train them, talk to them about it. Eventually they're competent. You feel competent working with them, especially if you're new to this. And every student is different, right? You could do this for bajillion years and have a totally different experience every time. And then it ends, right? And you have to say goodbye to them, and you're probably going to miss them too. So it's a kind of a parallel process in many ways. Any questions on these stages? All right. So we are going to move on to some business. When will you be seeing us? At a minimum, once a semester. So we have our fall liaison visit or a fall site visit. And then we have the same thing that happens in the spring. These meetings are designed to check in, see how things are going. In the fall visit, you'll probably talk a lot about the learning contract and the goals. In the spring visit, you'll probably talk about how the year is going to wrap up, how things have been going, that sort of thing. This visit is the responsibility of your student to arrange. It can be a little challenging, right? Because they have to be there. One of us has to be there, the practicum instructor, and then the task supervisor is not required to be there, but it's nice for them to be there, right? If they have one. So that could be potentially 4 schedules you're trying to manage. So these can be either virtual or in person, right? To kind of help with that scheduling. We're also happy to meet with you anytime you need support or consultation, right? As we've said 100 times, hopefully you've received the message. If you have any concerns, any doubts, you're seeing any red flags, yellow flags, unsure feelings, right? Please let us know right away, right? If you need your IPT password reset, I'm happy to do it, right? If something looks weird in IPT, you're like, oh my God, I just deleted something. Trust me, it's fine. We can go in and change it, right? It's a goofy system, but we can see the backside of it and we can make changes. So really anytime you need us, email, phone call, Zoom, whatever you need. It's kind of hard to see these slides with this picture right here. When do you hear from us? Most commonly, you'll get information from either Heidi or Rosetta. These might be sort of lengthy emails, particularly the ones from Rosetta, but trust me, they're filled with very useful and valuable information. She knows what she's doing and she puts it all in there, right? So if you have a question, go back to the email. She's probably already answered it. Information about events that we might have coming up, information about things that are going on with the students. We're not going to spam you, but it's important to look out for that information, right? If we're sending you something, you should read it, right? Sometimes also we might email you if we're looking for assistance or help in any way. You know, we're talking about this curriculum redesign and what might be beneficial for students, along with other topics that we might want your feedback on, right? So that might happen on occasion as well. Important dates to make note of. September 3rd, the one that's probably the most important at this moment, is when classes start and liability insurance begins. So your students cannot be interacting with clients before that date, okay? They can start at your agency. They can do orientation, training, onboarding, whatever you want to call it. You can tour them around the place if you have a physical location, but they can't be interacting with clients, right? Not even like shadowing and observing, right? Because they're not protected by the liability. You can do little mock interviews with them if you want, but no actual client work until class starts. The initial practicum contract is due September 30th. So that's that short 1-pager that kind of establishes your expectations for the internship. Not a lot of information, but some important things to address in there. We also have an in-service on September 30th. This is a Monday, which is a day that your student might normally be at your agency. So just know that we are expecting them to be at this in-service. It's a requirement. It's considered a class day. It's when they're going to be working a lot on their learning contracts. Okay. There's a AM and a PM session. So they won't be gone the whole day, but they might, depending on how you've got them set up. October 14th, the learning contract is due. So that's the big one with at least 5 goals of what they're going to be working on. And the fall visits need to be completed by October 31st. Okay, and your students will be aware of all of these dates. It's their responsibility to keep track of them and get this done, right? But it's helpful for you to know also, right? We're gonna have a part 2 to this training in November, so keep an eye out for that email with information. December 6th, the mid-evaluation of the learning contract is due. That's the check-in on where the student evaluates how they've been doing with their goals, and you provide feedback as well. December 19th, winter break begins. So in that initial learning contract that was due on September 30th, hopefully you talked about winter break, spring break, schedules, that kind of thing. Because there's a huge chunk of time there where they may or may not be at your site, right? We can't tell them to go to their internship over winter break because they're not in school, but a lot of them will choose to, right? They want to catch up on hours, or they really see it as a valuable learning opportunity. Others will say, no, I really need a break. I'm going to take a week or 2 weeks, and then I'll come back in January, something like that, right? Or they might adjust their schedule. I'm just going to go down to 15 hours or something. We'll be hosting ethics training on January 9th, so you can get your free ethics CEUs that are required for your license. So hold that spot on your calendar if that's valuable to you. Winter break ends at the end of January and the spring semester begins. January 27th, we're having our job fair. This was a huge hit last year. We hosted it at Kaufman in the big hall. I guess you'd call it the Great Hall, I think is what they call it. It is really big. It's where we used to have the field fair many, many years ago. Looks very similar with all these organizations lined up with their booths, except all these organizations are looking to hire social work students, right? And it's not just U of M students, but students from all programs are invited to attend. So hold that date if that's something that you or someone at your agency, HR, whoever might be interested in setting a table up at. You'll get a lot of information about that in the future. All right, we have a part 3 to this training. So much fun training for you in February 24th. We have our spring break in March. So again, keep an eye on that in terms of your student and their schedule. We have our paid event, which is our Practicum, oh my gosh, Agency Information Day. Yes, Practicum Agency Information Day. Every time it messes me up. I just see money right there. It has nothing to do with money, unfortunately. Our students get really excited. They're like, it's a paid event. I get paid to be there. I was like, I wish I could tell you that. But starting April 1st, you're already looking for a new intern, right? So crazy how quickly the time goes by. That is an online event, and you can have a Zoom room where students pop in, that sort of thing, to do interviews. A lot of you probably participated in this last year if you were around or in years past. And then at the end of April, we have our appreciation luncheon, which is our way to show our appreciation to you. We invite you all to attend for lunch and dessert and awards and I don't know, maybe entertainment, we'll see. But it's just a fun chance for us all to get together and celebrate the year. Any questions on any of these dates or really anything we've talked about? Yeah. Will they put in time?
Like the training, is it all day or is it?
Oh,
We know that, it's in our calendar and we will get that to you right away. We will have these, slides for you and stuff.
You guys, one question, September 3rd, so they cannot be like with us, with clients until that day or later?
correct.
Okay.
Awesome.